So, yeah, I'm Tim Lowley. I've been making art for quite a while. I think it's probably about 35 years. And I teach at North Park University, and I run the gallery. I'm artist in residence. So yeah, I've been making art for a long time. The central subject of my work increasingly has been my daughter Tema, she is, clinically she'd be described as profoundly disabled. I describe her as profoundly other, and really, my work doesn't have to do so much with disability. My work with Tema, it really has to do with. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure what it's about. It is about mystery. It's about making paintings, and this is a really good example of a painting that is about not knowing, and yet moving forward into a kind of mystery. So yeah, I recently made a series of drawings we were just talking about that's currently being installed on every third day basis at a school in Canada, and that work was interesting because I haven't worked from life much recently. Most of my work is done using photographs as a reference. In this case, I was drawing these postcard-sized drawings, starting from life, and then taking a photograph, and if necessary, using the photograph to finish the piece. They weren't like this piece. Actually, I had taken a photograph. I did some processing in Photoshop long before I was even thinking of making a painting from it, and then I made this sort of photo work and digital processing that I really liked and thought that could make for an interesting painting. Most of my paintings arise through that kind of a process where I rarely take photographs for the purpose of making a painting. I just take lots of photographs of Tema, other subjects as well, but Tema, a lot of photographs of her. And she doesn't pose, so there's no. It's kind of hard to say that they're not random, but they're also not. I rarely pose her, and she doesn't. She doesn't have any awareness of being photographed. So these drawings were a little different in terms of they were done from life. There wasn't like I was trying to set up an image that's well composed or something. I was simply drawing, in all cases, drawing her face, her head. And it was also interesting because during the time I had recently had surgery, and over the course of making these drawings, my wife and Tim and I all got the flu twice. And so the drawings have a kind of, for me, there was a kind of, not therapeutic quality, but there was a quality related to being in a state of, what would you call it? Being sick and getting well, and
convalescence.
Yeah, a kind of convalescence, and also a kind of awareness of suffering, particularly in relation to Tema, because when she gets sick, there's a kind of pathetic quality about her that, and I don't mean that in any sort of derogatory sense, it's just like she is suffering without any understanding of why she's suffering. She has a cold, she doesn't understand how she got it, I mean, all she knows is what's in the moment, right? So for me, that was part of what was in the work. The strange thing about the work with Tema is it's really not about her, and I'm not sure what it's about. I think it's basically about being present to mystery, and in a way, it's kind of about unknowing. Although at the same time, it's about knowing. So,
what are other responses to mystery that are not you find helpful or appropriate? Like, is there an aspect of you want people to be attentive to mystery, or is this simply your response to mystery? Are you trying to critique or
that's a good
open
question.
up a space for mystery that isn't here in our culture or society? Or
I can't really tell. it's kind of funny because I was thinking about this today. A lot of art that's made now is, I shouldn't say now, throughout history, is made in response to art movements and art things like that. For me, that's true to some extent, but early on, I had an experience in South Korea, which is where I grew up, meeting this one artist, Mok Sang, who is part of the Minjung art movement, and the Minjung art movement was related to, is somewhat similar to liberation theology in terms of an idea that your work is oriented to the poor. That, simply put, that's what it means, that what you're doing is oriented towards giving agency to the poor. And what I found profoundly moving about that is the work they're making, and there were other artists in addition to my friend, but the work they're making really felt like it was kind of in the margins of contemporary art, what would have been central ideas of contemporary
Meaning
art.
stylistically, or
Yeah, they weren't really
methods?
interested in the things that tend to drive art movements, which tend to be stylistic. At least in the 20th century, they were largely stylistic. Increasingly, they become conceptual. Sometimes political. Sometimes various things. But they tend to be as much driven by the market as anything else. Nobody talks about that, but how do you sell art? Well, it's the latest thing, right? So, all that to say that I don't really think of my work particularly in relation to art movements or current art thought, although it's not something I'm uninterested in, but it's in relation to this utter consistent mystery. Now, that may sound like a kind of a lame thing to say, but that's what I'm doing.
What are practices in, and obviously every work is different, and certainly like these small drawings from life are different than a painting like this, but what are maybe some practices in the making of the work that draw you into that mystery or open it up or make it, allow you to be present to it, so in the making of it?
Right. Well, the making of a painting, which is something I'm really interested in, is again a practice in mystery. Because you might think you know what you're doing, you're mistaken. There are artists, I shouldn't put it quite that way, because there are artists, I think, who are very like, I do this step, this step, this step, and that leads to the result, and they end up with work that's very consistent, and in some ways that enables a kind of increasing excellence, because the better you do it, the better you do it, better, you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways that's what we mean by mastery in art. And I suppose in some ways that's what my first 15 years of painting were. We're trying to somehow master technique. So in some sense I have some degree of mastery, but what's interesting to me is, what is this painting? What is it about? And I usually don't know. I mean, I have some sort of reference usually that I'm using to make it. But even the reference, I start, as I said, with a photograph, but then I'll take into Photoshop and do things to it that, for me, are sort of pushing it away from the objectivity of photography. As a way of a first step towards making a painting, I only started doing this within the last 10 years. You would think that would make it easier. It actually doesn't make it easier. It's still just like confounding. How do I make this thing, and what is it? And when I'm saying this thing, I'm not talking about the image necessarily. I'm just talking about a painting. A painting is crazily complex, and the way I work with paint is multiple layers. I'm interested in. I don't make my own paint as much as I used to, but I because I made my own paint, making it took it for many years. I'm thinking about this material as not simply a means to an end, but a thing that in itself is meaningful. And I had a conversation with someone the other day where we were talking about painting, and I was glad she responded to the painting that I'm doing talking about that it's not really just about an idea or just about a political intention. It's really about painting, and
it's about this painting.
it's about this painting, right? Which
It's not just the idea. I mean, it might be about the idea of painting, but it's also always.
it's about a particular painting, right? And that's actually very important, which again, for me, has a spiritual ramification, has a political ramification. It has to do with, are you present to the one you are with? Are you present to the thing you are with? Are you, and that's a complicated thing, because a painting is, you're helping it sort of come into being, but you're at the same time you're having conversation with it in all the things it talks with, right? So, like with this particular painting, I was thinking about Redon, and thinking about the mystery of Redon's work and the way he used color. I mean, I think I was thinking about Redon. It seems logical that I would have been thinking about him. And so there's always these kind of sub-conversations that are happening that actually are not part of the original. They may have been part of the original intent, but in general, they sort of creep in, and I would say at any point in your development as an artist, that's the case. You're always, in school it might be your teacher's voices that are in your head, but yeah. And again, going back to why Tema, well, she never talks back. She never, there's never the kind of like interaction we're having. There's just this sort of relentless is too tough a word, just sort of this very persistent presence. And for me, it's very compelling. I don't think I would be interested in painting someone else the way I paint Tema, that is, repeatedly. But with Tema, it's like I'm always looking at someone I don't know and know intimately at the same time. So it's a very I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm cheating by where's your great monumental idea or whatever, so I'm just painting her.
Well, I could see it being, it might be, in one way, it might be more difficult to have a subject talk back to you and critique the rendition that you've done of them.
Right.
But silence is, I don't think silence is more comforting. It's a very different kind of.
No, I would love it if she would talk back to me and tell me what I'm getting wrong, because I often can't figure out what's wrong. But yeah, it's a different kind of experience, and I'm still trying to figure out what it's about. I mean, it's in some ways it feels pathetic, or because there is a lot of pathos there, but it just feels like, couldn't you think of something better to do? But that's the thing, I cannot think of anybody I would rather paint. I mean, I've done paintings and drawn and painted other people, but yeah, it's
Inexhaustible.
Yeah, inexhaustible. The artist who ironically comes to my mind so often when I'm thinking about what I'm doing as an artist is the artist Ankawara. It's a Japanese artist who, he did a variety of things, but he's best known for making these paintings of the day's date, where I guess he would wake up in the morning, have a canvas and paint October 2nd, 1973, the day's date. And that's what he would do. And then the next day, he would paint the next day's date. And there's all different ways you can think of or talk about his work, but it's like, there was something, again, he's not one of my favorite artists, but he sort of sticks in my head in terms of a practice that is seemingly absurd. Why would you paint the day's date every day? Well, the day's date is actually super important to somebody, right? You're born on that date. It's super. So when you walk in
somebody died on that date.
right? So the curious thing about a painting of a day's date is he's actually making a painting. It is a painting, and it's a date. Which again has, I like the fact. What I like about it is this sort of a practice that has. It's seemingly boring. I don't think painting Tema is boring at all. But I like what I like about Ankara's practice is it says, actually, it's really quite a good idea to stick with something relentlessly for a long, long time. Something might happen, or it might not happen.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, it's kind of, I think what prayer might be about, was sort of being present to, as opposed to this expectation of everything's this.
Yeah. So do you want to say something about this painting, either in terms of those themes of how did this one work through the questions of mystery or presence, or because it is a different portrayal. I mean, every portrayal of Tema is different. This one is, if I can use the word, strange compared to others.
It's especially different, and the reason I'd say it's especially different is Tema can't walk, and this painting implies that she can. So I'll just talk about how this painting came into being. So I often, as I said, I often photograph Tema, and sometimes the photograph that I've taken of her I find to be particularly compelling. And in this particular photograph, she was sitting in her wheelchair and she was wrapped in this sort of tie-dyed kind of blanket that we had. And I liked the image, and I took it into Photoshop and started layering textures over it. And it started becoming this curious atmosphere kind of space. And I think at some point one of the photographs I used had some sort of a line in it, and it created this line that's down at the bottom, which became like the base of what the painting has this strange implication that you're in a room, and this is actually a wall. That for some reason she's emerging from the wall, or that's another space and she's crossing over the border, which is that line. So anyway, that's where the image started, with this photo work that I had made. And different things happened over the course of making it. For instance, like most of my large paintings, this is multiple parts, because the wood typically only comes in 4x8 sheets. And so this actually has 3 sections. There's the 4-foot wide section in the middle, and then there's this narrow section here, there's a narrow section there, and a narrow section at the bottom. So I've been interested in paintings that have these multiple sections for pragmatic purposes, but also because of the sort of the way in which they reference triptychs or other kinds of forms of paintings. Yeah, the title of the piece is a reverie, well, it's actually Dear Protagonist, and then parenthetically, a reverie regarding you in the perpetual present. And so the Dear Protagonist part of it is sort of referencing the fact that Tema is my dear protagonist, but it also is unclear if it's referencing her or if it's referencing you, the viewer, right? Dear protagonist. And a protagonist is the sort of heroine or the hero of a story. And then the parenthetical part is a reverie, which sort of implies that the painting's a kind of a dream. A reverie regarding you in the perpetual present, which, as I think I said earlier, Tema, there's the sense that she's always in the moment. She's never like living in the past or thinking about the past in relation to the present. And there's something quite moving to me about that, in terms of how most of us don't live that way. We don't really live in the present. We're sort of wandering into the present with a distraction always in the back of our mind.
It's a great word, though. You said it's moving to you, right?
Yeah.
And It's an interesting word choice
Yeah.
because it moves you elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I know you had the show. I don't know if this one was in the show. I think it was a different one, large scale one with the marks,
The dot painting.
the dot painting. That was called Without Moving.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah. There's. I'm playing with that word of something that's moving. That is, it's emotionally moving to us, or it's actually moving in time and space. And yeah.
Well, thanks, Tim.
I just wandered off in my mind.
That's how it conversation should end.
Yeah, and the sun is going down.
Like just
You're
doing-
not Tim Lowley. I
You're Tim
am
Lowley.
Tim Lowley. You are
Right.
not. You are Carl.
That's the project.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm Tim Lowley. I have been making art for a long time.